So Zach, the reason he's here, I traded email, so he's awesome by association. Someone I respect and is awesome said, Zach's awesome, and he's going to be in Boston. You should do something. And I'm like, sure. So with that, I'm going to introduce Zach Holman.
That's probably my favorite introduction of all time. That's hilarious. I have a microphone. Hold on. Cool. All right. Everyone hear me? Yep. More or less. All right, the title of my talk is Sure. No. The title of my talk is Product is the Byproduct. And by that, I think you can create a really great product, but it's better to grow a great product. Wait, I should stop talking like that. I hate when people get up on stage and start talking about product like it's some amazing angelic thing. Here's what I actually mean. I think you should worry more about building the damn thing and worry less about what you're actually building. By that, I also mean a product should be a byproduct of the people, process, and technology of your company. So focus less on the actual thing and more on the stuff surrounding what you're building. I really think if you foster a really good environment, you're more likely to create a good product. If you look around and look at really good companies, people with a lot of good culture behind them, more often than not, they tend to be successful. There's a lot of companies with horrible culture that still are successful, but that is America. So I'm Zach Holman. This is a picture from our charity dodgeball tournament in the fall. This is great because you can put pictures of yourself in small shorts, and since it's for charity, everyone thinks it's awesome. Dodgeball is amazing. I was just happy about that. And I do work for GitHub. I'm a developer there, and I talk a lot about how we work, how open source works. That's kind of tangential. All of this talk sort of stemmed from looking around about how GitHub sort of does stuff. And yeah, we'll just start from there. Team. Team is a critical part of your company. Everyone gets on stage and says people are important. So I'm going to do that as well and say that people are important. People are extremely important. This is my team. This is my team circa a year ago. We probably added them on 70 or 80. We're at 153 total right now. And this team is really important to me. Kyle Neath, our director of design at GitHub, said something in Campfire just offhandedly, which I thought was really interesting. He said, there are thousands of developers who are extremely smart and talented, all of whom I would never ever hire here. And I think that's really indicative of what we try to find at GitHub, is that it's not just about smarts anymore. It's about how you think about things, how you come to things, how you deal with problems. And it's not necessarily IQ points anymore. It's the whole spectrum of stuff. One thing we try to figure out at GitHub is to try and hire people bothered by stuff. By that I mean, basically you want fixers. You want somebody who, if they deal with a certain application on a day-to-day basis, they're bothered by stuff that sucks. They're bothered by things that, isn't quite designed as well as it could be. It isn't quite as fast as it could be. There's a lot of developers or designers who will just, if that's not necessarily their 100% priority, they're just not going to fix it because that's not in their job description. We don't want those types of people. We want fixers. We're big fans of Valve. Valve leaked their handbook last year. Fantastic marketing for them. I love that. But we were really excited about this handbook because we found that Valve has sort of ended up working the exact same way that we have over the years. And they're about twice the size of us. So that's really interesting to see them sort of confirm the way that we're working. And in their handbook, they said this: anytime you interview a potential hire, you need to ask yourself not only if they're talented or collaborative, but also if they're capable of literally running this company, because they will be. I think more often than not, people don't recognize that fact. Even like the low-level developer on your team, they end up making a ton of small decisions that impact you down the line. And people think, oh, it's not that critical. But they tend to be like these very small decisions, like, oh, should this code be this way? And if you feel like you can trust everyone to say, okay, everyone else is dead, now you have to run the company. That changes the amount of reliability you feel in letting people make those small choices. So I hire broad people, just like that in general, rather than just hiring the smart and the best and brightest. It's kind of silly. I like really broad, interesting people. Diverse people is also a side of that. This room is better than most. A lot of white dudes my age in here, which is basically all I ever talk to, which is really sad. But diversity really matters. And there's some really interesting studies surrounding this. Cox and Blake in '91, they concluded that groups exposed to minority views were more creative than the more homogeneous majority groups. And I think that's makes sense anecdotally too. If somebody comes from different backgrounds or different values than you, and you include them on your team, you're going to end up with a more interesting solution that will tackle more people's viewpoints. For more up-to-date stuff, VentureSource looked at a whole bunch of different startups and looked at the success of those startups over time. And they found that the overall median proportion of female executives in successful companies is 7.1% compared to 3.1% at unsuccessful companies. All of this sort of stems from this idea that this really impacts your bottom line. There's just some people in life that you just have to go back to money and say, yes, this will make a better product. This will make more diversity in your company will make you more profitable. And I think that's definitely really true. Building a company that's friendly to everyone is not as valued as highly as it should be in our industry. There's a lot of different ways you can sort of deal with that, building this company that you want to work at. One is tone, just how do you talk about yourselves to other people? There's another study that was really fascinating, and they just talk about wording. They say that increases in masculine wording were sufficient to decrease women's job appeal ratings, their anticipated belongingness in specific occupations. Bunch of academia words. Basically what I mean is stuff like this, like badass, killer rock star, dominant force in the industry. We see those all the time. And compare those to job postings that will talk about happiness in the workplace, or honesty, or working stuff, building stuff together. I'd much rather work there, and that's the critical point for all of this stuff, because it works for men too. I would much rather work at some place talking about happiness than talking about badass, beasting on code or something like that. It comes down to this for me. It's like if you're building a company and it appeals to more people, then go in that direction. So basically just consider your approach. Also, I really hate programmers. I just want to underline that. I hate all of that. Cool, team is important. Culture is also really important. All of this is just, no. Crushing code and all that stuff. It's just not a culture you really want to have. Good culture attracts really good people. And I believe that 1,000,000,000%. That doesn't work with math, but I believe it 1,000,000,000% over. It turns out once you have really good people, they mate, and then they have kids and offspring and stuff like that. And it's weird how our industry in particular forgets that point. Families are critical, So being family friendly is really important for us at GitHub. We usually get together twice a year to have these big company-wide summits, and we try to make it a really big point to have these sort of family-friendly outings, because I want to get to know my coworkers' families, because their kids are almost always more interesting than their parents. They do funny things, So consider that. How do you build your actual events in a way to make your company more interesting for everyone? There's a lot of ways that GitHub does it ourselves, this idea of flexibility. One is just location. We're about 2/3 remote employees at GitHub, which I think is interesting. And of those, we have maybe 1/3 that live in San Francisco, and of those, maybe half end up going to the office every single day. It's just a really weird, but it's a really flexible way of work. And I think that really helps us in attracting, a very family-friendly, centric focus. Hours are really important for us. We let people work any sort of hours because, man, if you're not a morning person, if you ever had this guy say, all right, you gotta come in at 9 in the morning for the stand-up meeting, and you're just no. I'm gonna be asleep in my head till 2 p.m. and just dragging me in is not going to help. So we have a very flexible hour perspective of work at GitHub. We let people work when they want to work. And then finally, just the same workload. This whole idea of doing 140-hour weeks, especially in the gaming industry, where they think that's a healthy way to work. That sucks. We much prefer the idea that if you work reasonable hours, you're going to be much more creative. You're going to be much more, you produce really good work if you work not crazy hours. So basically you limit yourself with all of these things. You limit yourself with saying you have to be in an office. You limit yourself by saying you have to have set work hours, or work 1 billion hours a week. One of my favorite stories that relates to all of this is the notion of OS X on Intel. And all of this happened because a self-demoted engineer wanted his son Max to be able to live close to Max's grandparents. The story is, this engineer's like, he's living out in Cupertino, and he's like, man, I really want to go to, I don't know, it's like Boston or something like that, because my family's near there, and my kid wants to, be with his grandparents and all that. And he talks to his boss, and he's like, well, I kind of want to move out, but is there like a project I can work on? I kind of want to like see if I can get OS X on Intel platform and see what goes on. And the boss is like, all right, yeah, just go away, just work on that. And they forget about him for like 16, 18 months because big companies and stuff like that. And then finally somebody's like, oh man, we got to figure out what this guy's been doing out there on the East Coast this whole time. So they bring him in, and he runs all of OS X on his Intel Windows box type of deal. And his boss is like, all right. And then he goes, gets his boss, and he gets his boss, and he gets his boss. And then it was like Steve Jobs was on the next flight to Tokyo or something, and to figure out ways to deal with all this stuff. Because it was awesome. It was really exciting. And it all stemmed from the boss's ability to let his, this really smart engineer work on what he wanted to, work on something that he thought was interesting, and work on from a place that he wouldn't have otherwise been able to work on. This all stemmed because they were very flexible. I don't know the guy personally, but I feel like if his manager would have said, no, you can't move, he would have been like, all right, bye. And then we wouldn't have had OS X on Intel. Maybe we wouldn't have had the iPhone, and then obviously we wouldn't have Android without the iPhone. It's weird to think all this stemmed from one specific person. So that stuff's really important. I want to talk a little bit about desire and building desire. Marketing is not a bad word, and I feel like that's probably nothing crazy to say here in this room. But a lot of other places, like developers, like to say like, oh, the marketing people, they're all just idiots. But it's not a bad word, because I think instead what we hate is just the disingenuous. This idea that someone's trying to sell you something that they just don't want themselves. So this guy goes up to you and he's like, oh, I really want you to buy my distributed social cat network. And you're like, well, wait, hold on. Let me just ask you a couple questions first. Like, one, do you even have a cat? And usually it's gonna be like, no, well, you should do it anyway. Or like, all right, don't we want to centralize cats? Because they're hard enough when they start darting around. They're all over the place. You want to centralize cats, not distributed. Would you even use this yourself? And I think that's the most critical question. And that's why we don't inherently like marketing, is you just feel like people are trying to shovel this crap on you that they don't actually want. So being genuine about this is the most fascinating part about all of this. A really good example recently, I gave this talk a month or so ago, and I gave a shout out to 1Password, and there's a 1Password dude in the audience, and he was just like, yeah, this is amazing, and he wasn't even listening to what I was saying, but it was good. The story with 1Password was funny, because I use 1Password for all the passwords, and it's awesome, and I love the app. They sent me an email like last summer or something about check out a new point version. And I skimmed the features, and I didn't care. I liked the app, but it wasn't something I was really fascinated with. But I'm reading through it, and it's like the founder or the CEO or something, and he's talking about these really incremental improvements that I don't care about, but he's talking about them with such enthusiasm. He's like, yeah, we got the whole team, we're working on this, and we're so excited about what we got coming. And even though I didn't really care about what he was trying to market to me at that point, I came away really impressed with how excited he was about the product. And I went from somebody who really liked the product into someone who really sort of admired and thought that they were really genuine, what they were trying to sell to me. And I thought that was really just important, because you don't see that much anymore, strangely enough. Being vocal is not bad. I think it's interesting to have people vocally talk about what they're working on. Blogging small improvements is really interesting. I think GitHub does that a lot more than anyone else. Any sort of small feature that we launch, we'll blog about it, because it's good. You get people talking about it. And it's the whole long tail effect, where you fix some small bug that has been eating away at some people, and most people don't care, but there'll be some people that say, yes, been looking for this for 2 years, and then they shared all their friends, and then some of those people are really excited about it. You don't get that unless you blog about these small incremental changes. All too often, a lot of companies just say, all right, we're only going to blog our 1.0 launch or 2.0 launch. We're only going to do press for these special events. You don't have to be that way. Leveraging regular press is a really powerful thing in general. This is one of the most interesting things I've seen in tech. Steve Jobs went on the stage in January and gave this keynote where he introduced the iPhone. And then on June 29th, they launched it. And people tend to just remember that. They go back and say, wow, yeah, you know, he went on stage, he did an awesome keynote, and then people just started buying it a whole bunch. The truth is a lot more interesting. There was a lot of stuff that Apple did in between those. February 26th, they released the first TV ad, which didn't even show the iPhone. It was just a bunch of people picking up a phone saying hello. June 3rd, they had TV ads. June 6th, they had another ad. WWDC was on June 11th, where they announced the iPhone SDK. Then they talked about an improved battery they were putting into it a week later. Same day, they announced a new glass screen for the iPhone. June 20th, they announced the YouTube app was going to be on it. Then there was another TV ad. There was a guided tour they announced. And they published all the press reviews and all the old school journalistic endeavors. And then June 26th, AT&T announced the plans for the iPhone. When you look at all this together, it becomes much more clear that this is a very concerted effort, especially in the last month leading up to the iPhone. The Apple PR was every single day, week, whatever, was announcing something new, which got them headlines almost every single day. I think that's fascinating. All these things are, to their credit, interesting things at least, so people are talking about it. It's not disingenuous. So talking about stuff regularly, I think, is important and amazing. Okay, once you've launched everything, that's cool, and then it's time to get the reaction of people, which is problematic for one reason. People on the internet are dicks, and man, they're just really assholes. I sometimes frequent Hacker News, and I see this all the time where someone, you know, like, I just spent 6 months on this. It's an open source project. It's awesome. It's totally free. You're gonna love it. And then someone comes in and is like, fuck it. This is the saddest thing of our industry. Yeah, there's probably this one guy had like one table in HTML or something, and somebody dug in the source and it's like, now I hate your whole product for this. Like, I hate you. It's terrible. That's Hacker News for you. But it's our whole industry. So the question I feel is like, how much should you care about this? How much should you worry about the reaction that you'll get from people when you push stuff out? And the answer is obviously 0. But that's really hard. It's really hard to sort of ignore all this feedback from people and ignore people saying, you know, fuck you, that was a dumb idea. So I've started thinking about this a lot, and I've sort of developed an informal thing called care theory, basically saying, should I care theory? How do you respond to feedback? And I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at this. Mostly I think there's like 3 specific groups that you should worry about when somebody's reacting to something that you built. One is fans, one is skeptics, and then another are haters. And these percentages are really relative. So it depends on the product launch. Sometimes you can have, you know, a lot more skeptics and haters. Sometimes you can have a whole bunch of fans. Sometimes you're going to launch something and it's just all haters. But it's important to recognize, you know, who these people are. Fans, I think, are users, people that are using your stuff, and, you know, that's all great. Skeptics are people that could be users of your product, and then haters are not users, typically. So should you worry about what they're saying? Fans, I think, yes. Skeptics, I think, maybe you should worry about it, and haters, you think, maybe you should worry about it. Skeptics, you gotta be worried about sometimes, because they always say if. So they'll be like, I'll use it if you add cats to your product. And you're like, well, why would I put cats in here? But all right, I'll add cats. And then they'll say, all right, I'll use it if you add cats and Ajax to it. And you're like, okay, all right, I'll just add Ajax. And they're like, oh, well, now I'll only use it if we use WebSockets too. And I'm just like, this is silly. So be wary of if. GitHub experienced this a lot earlier on before I joined 3 years ago, because when they were just getting started, GitHub got all this stuff from really larger, established open source projects where they'd say, well, you know, you look good, but you're not doing this, and we'd use GitHub if you added this. And to their credit, the founders were just like, all right, that's interesting. And then they just didn't usually add it unless it seemed like a really good idea. And then people ended up going anyway. We found this to happen a lot in a lot of different things that we work on. People think that they desperately need something because that's how they've always done it, and then they end up coming around. So just be wary about if. Be wary about what somebody says, we will definitely use you only if you add X. I don't even know what that slide is talking about. I want to talk about haters. That's really what I want to talk about. Because haters are also really interesting. I think haters are also broken up into 3 separate groups. One is just unreachable people. This is totally fine. People may hate on your stuff because they aren't going to ever use your product. A social distributed cat network, maybe you don't have a cat. You're going to be unreachable, and that's fine. They're just never going to use you. So don't worry about them too much. There's another group that may come around when you succeed. There's always this whole, the iPod, less space than a Nomad, lame, but they end up buying one anyway 4 years later. And then there's just finally assholes who are just assholes on the internet. This is the group you should worry about. These are the people that, they may come around once you hit market penetration, once you've demonstrated that your product is actually really worthwhile. So worry about them. Don't worry as much about the assholes and the unreachable people because it's not worth your time. So not all feedback is really equal. And that's important. Like the thing that kills me the most is seeing somebody who is doing really awesome, creates a really great product or something, and they're just really worried about thousands of people yelling at you over Twitter for something that you said or something like that. Try not to worry too much about reaction. And when you do, worry about who is specifically saying that. Who is, identify what audience they're from, because not all feedback is equal. And remember that nothing great was ever not shipped. It's important to realize that everything goes through these steps. Every single thing that has ever been shipped by anybody has gone through haters and people who love it and people who are uncertain about it. So overall, building products is really hard. I think we all sort of inherently know that. It's a difficult problem. But I think you can really build it indirectly. I think you can build really great products just by building a really good environment. And that involves a whole bunch of different stuff. It involves people, your culture, building desire, managing reaction. You can't just say, I'm going to have a great culture and then just never market your product. Like, people need to see your product. And you have to be able to realize when to throw down into battle. Just don't attack the haters all the time because you think that you have to do that. Recognize where the hate is coming from and then just work on building a really good product that way. So thanks, that's what I've got. I ended kind of early. If you guys have questions and stuff, I'd be happy to talk forever.
I'll pick it up. So you've been there about 3 years now. In those 3 years, GitHub has raised a ton of capital. Can you talk about how the culture has changed as a result of growth and having access to cash? And are you guys buying small planets or what's going on?
What was the last part?
Are you buying small planets in places or
Not publicly, no. So the money thing is really fascinating, I think, as an employee who just digs GitHub and what the founders have done over the years. We went 4 years or so without taking any financing at all because we've been profitable pretty much since day one, which really changes your perspective on stuff. So we had 4 years of doing whatever we wanted and not having to answer to anybody because we were profitable and we didn't have to answer to anybody. When we took money, that changed the game because we could take money on our own terms. We could just say, no, and then go off and make money. That's different because you end up being able to take really good terms and still take that money, but still be able to retain a lot of culture. I don't feel beholden to anyone. I can go on stage and talk shit about Andreessen Horowitz because, whatever. We have good terms and, we still own the company and stuff like that. So I don't feel like it's a culture thing at all for us. I think we've done a really good job at both identifying our own culture, which I think is a big first step to figure out what you actually value, and then it's I think a lot of part of it is just hiring the right people too. If we had something where like somebody said, all right, now we have to change everything and go back to this really weird way of working, we wouldn't be able to do that because everyone would quit because people are really passionate about how we work. So that's been really nice for us because we've just not had to deal with culture change at all. Mm-hmm.
So, if I'm correct, you have 153 people now, and you've hired about half of them in the last year.
Yeah, sounds about right.
2/3 are working from home. So how do you teach that culture to 50 work from home employees?
So I get that question fairly frequently, and it's a lot harder to go from a company that everybody works in the office to going really distributed. For us, it was really nice because we spent 2 years without an office. So, and we were very small at that point. When we got an office, we were about 9 people. So from that point, like we had a very ingrained culture of letting people, work from home, meaning we have a huge emphasis on chat, a huge emphasis on working via email rather than, that's why we don't have any meetings and stuff at the office because, nobody's in the office. So for us, it's been a matter of just building a culture and going from that point. I think it's a lot harder to say, we have everyone's in the office today, how do we start being more remote? But I think it's just identifying what you do that requires being physically in the office and then just start removing that. If it's a lot of meetings, start asking, can we do this on an email thread? Can we do this over chat rather than having to be in the office? And then just, piece by piece going from there, I guess. Good. Yes?
What's the demographics like at GitHub?
Demographics how?
Like you said, trying to hire diverse people and like families and stuff. What's the median age? Or,
I have no idea on the age anymore. That's gotten a lot more diverse faster than other statistics, I think. I know we've doubled our female engineering staff in the last month, which has been good, but it's still a lot lower. I honestly don't know. What is it, like 6 or something like that? Yeah. I mean, our problem is...
1 billion%.
No, the problem I have with a lot of companies that say they're diverse in terms of gender is that they tend to stick their females in, specific roles. So like the stereotypical is like secretarial and stuff, which I'm not saying is bad by any stretch of the imagination. I'm saying if you look at their development teams, they're like 100% male, and they're still saying we're very diverse and stuff. For us, it's a little bit trickier because we don't have managers. We don't really have all these other areas. So we're such a, I don't know, we've 120 technical workers or something like that out of the 150. So it's a different pool to sort of hire from. So it's something that we still suck at, and we're trying to improve dramatically. It just takes a long time. In the back first.
So you're obviously very passionate about the culture at GitHub. Is everyone there as passionate about it as you?
I believe so. People get angry about stuff, which I think is really good. There's this idea that people tend to really hate process in general, and every now and then there'll be somebody suggesting something that maybe will add some sort of process for good reasons. And people will jump on that right away and say, do we actually need this? And I think GitHub more than anyone else is able to reflect upon that better. Like, I have to do this every day. Like, can we just automate this away? And we're really good at doing that sort of stuff. And we're good at hiring people that really worry about that stuff too, I think.
What are some examples of processes you actually have?
So the pull request in general, our ability to merge code into the master branch is kind of central to everything. And the process there very generally is you open a pull request, you get +1s or thumbs up from people that are responsible for that code, and then you merge it. And the good process beyond that is we force the responsibility on you to A, merge it, and B, make sure the tests are written all right for that, and then you also support that feature as well. I think we have a good emphasis in our processes in general about responsibility and putting the responsibility on you to be responsible for your code, rather than saying, all right, I push it to QA. QA is going to make sure they're going to run it through the systems, and now I don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's one side of things. We also do we have like an internal team app, which is sort of like a Twitter / way to collect ideas for where to take stuff long term. Again, not really much of a process, just kind of post whenever you have either done something or really posted an idea that is something for a longer term change, something like that.
Sorry. Any questions? I have lots of questions.
Sure.
You said you were like Val, right? And the thing that my mind just like can't handle it when it says like that everyone works on whatever they want and they just move the desk to the next group, and now they're working on that team and they can just get up and to the next floor anytime they want to. Are you guys like that? Is that real?
Yeah, it works fairly well. We tend to say it's the land of best argument, I guess. And one benefit of the way that we work is that things tend to go down in pairs. A natural like back-end, front-end pair, like you want somebody to do the design, someone to do the back-end on a specific feature. Most features will include like a dozen people or something, but it's usually 2 people driving it. And to get to that point, you usually have like a back-end guy saying, I really want this feature, someone work on it with me, please. And you have to do a really good argument of saying, check this out, this is gonna be really great, and for a designer to come work with you on it is at least saying the designer thinks it's a good idea. So from there, it's sort of like a good way of saying, well, if nobody wants to work on this with me, it's probably not a good idea. As an aside, I think we do a really good job at allowing people to not work on stuff too, which I think is almost as important as letting people work on what they want to work on. Specifically, I'm thinking about, there's been a lot of side projects at GitHub that they started out really dumb and small, and they ended up being critical to everything that we do. One of which is HubSpot, another one is Boxen, another one is all of our deployment and testing infrastructure. Those all stem from somebody saying, I don't really want to work on my day-to-day stuff because it's tiring for me right now, or I just want to work on this new technology stack or whatever. And letting people do that sort of thing and saying, just work on what you want to work on, ends up building some really interesting stuff that, I don't want to work at a company without a HubSpot anymore because it's that mission critical to how we work. So I think that's been really, good for us.
Can you talk about your deployment infrastructure?
Yeah, so it's kind of tied to our testing a lot. Where if you push a commit, like the very basic example, I push a commit right now to GitHub / GitHub, our main github.com repository. If I push that to the master branch, the test will run automatically, and as soon as they're run, they'll deploy the code. Usually everything's done on a branch, and then once the branch is ready to go, all the tests are green to get merged in and deployed again. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what specifically you want to talk about, I guess. All of our tests are Jenkins related infrastructure. Deployment is handled from this Ruby app basically called Heaven, which is just a Capistrano wrapper, so to speak. It's just like an API that HubSpot can talk to. And then that knows, you say like HubSpot deploy GitHub to production, HubSpot talks to this Heaven API, Heaven knows all of the boxes that we deploy to, all the 100 boxes or whatever, and then actually runs all the commands. So basically we have all these automated steps tied down to just one simple command that everyone can deploy from. Does that help maybe? I don't know. It's complicated.
I guess I'm kind of curious what happens when things sort of go off the rails, organizationally speaking. Like you have all this independence and flexibility and a very flat sort of management, if any management at all. What happens when you get a pair of people that are off on some totally harebrained scheme? Is that cool? Do they get 6 months? Like, how does it work?
It depends. Sometimes harebrained schemes are amazing. But there are times when you want some level of control, I guess. One of the interesting things we've realized as we've grown bigger, and we've realized we've sort of modeled ourselves after open source. We're sort of like an open source company. And by that, I mean, we have, there are natural maintainers of an open source project, and they are sort of the spiritual leaders / in charge of the bare metal, bare bones, like, yes, I want your code in my project. And in that case, those are the people who I would feel like should be in charge of saying, no, you've gone too long down the rabbit hole on this one, come up for air, figure out some way to ship this immediately, or can we figure out some way to take this where you can get out the door and work on some stuff. Usually there's some level of friction that appears at some point where either you're getting upset because you're 6 months down and you haven't actually shipped anything yet, or someone else is getting upset because you haven't shipped anything yet. And I think it's we have a really strong culture of like we want people to ship stuff. We want people to keep pushing out new code. And I think if it gets down to that, if it gets that far down where nobody's shipping, you just start having conversations and see.
So is this all peers looking at their peers, or is this? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's really, it's worked really well for us. Like people tend to know either who's pulling their own weight, or if they're just the product they're working on is just the feature just doesn't make any sense. And I think alongside that you have a good culture of people saying no. And we try like with the team app internally, like pushing ideas and stuff out. You want to get people to say no as soon as possible so people don't spend 6 months on something that ultimately won't ship.
So along the lines of that saying no, it strikes me you guys have a really focused product. It's very clear you know who your user is and your customer is and who isn't. How do you guys, from more like a product perspective, like my guess is you're very good at saying no to features and functions. That's just not going to happen. Can you get some lights on anything unique that you guys do to say no?
One of it is hiring people who say no. Like literally, they're sometimes they're jerks in a nice way, but you want people who are are very comfortable with that. And then I guess the other part of that is just like building steps along the way to make people to say no early, like I was saying earlier. But other than that, I mean, it's I guess there's no really secret magic formula, I guess. Just NO. Yep.
Back on the culture, do you guys have job titles, or how has that evolved, or is it just
No, we have the mandated like CEO, CTO, stuff like that. We used to have like directors, but we kind of dropped those titles, like director of design and stuff, because it's for us it's mostly come down to project-oriented leadership roles. Again, like this idea of like an open source project, like spiritual leaders to a project tends to be the one with the final say in something. And it usually, like, there's very few times where it escalates to the point where we need somebody external to that project to say, just come in and put their foot down and say, like, no, do this some other way or something like that.
GitHub seems to be synonymous with open source software right now, and developers love it. But are you looking beyond that to provide a more generic collaboration platform that really anybody can use and use to come together to build anything they're talking about?
Yes. No. We tend not to talk about future stuff too much. So.
How's the SaaS? You have both the SaaS model and self-hosted kind of model. What are the kind of challenges faced by having a hybrid model? And can you talk something about that?
So one is technical. So I came on 3 years ago to work on GitHub FI, which would eventually become GitHub Enterprise. And dealing with this idea of, back then it was way more extreme. It was me versus 10 developers who were coding ridiculous amounts every day, and I would have to try and figure out, does this code work in our installable product? How do I have to change it? And it was just like the balance between all of that became really difficult. And that's something we wanted to consider in once we ended up launching GitHub Enterprise is, can we build a model where we can easily kind of ship both products at the same time? Because they are the same product, they are the same code base, except GitHub Enterprise is effectively the superset of features because it has enterprise, like LDAP, all the stuff like that. So a lot of it was just figuring out the best ways to deal with that. We ended up doing it, we solved that by doing the same thing we do with .com. Like we have staff features in .com all over the place. Like last time I counted, we have like 40 or 50 staff-only features that I have that you guys don't have yet. And we just use that same sort of idea in saying, well, if this is enterprise, do this other code path and stuff like that. So that was part of it. The other part is non-technical inherently. One is just salespeople. That's always been the concern, is that you bring in people that aren't douches. And I don't know how many salespeople are here, but stereotypically, not you guys, whoever are salespeople here, but they tend to be a lot more, focused on the money, I guess, which is their job and stuff. But you still want people to be focused on the product. I talk about our developers being able to say no. Like, our salespeople are really good at saying no, because they get the if question all the time. Like, we'll add it only if you add X, and we'll pay you X hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're just like, no. And it's weird with big enterprise companies. They'll usually just be like, all right, my boss just made me ask that. We're just gonna buy it anyway. So that's been good. Like, that's probably been the biggest fear I've had for enterprise, is like, they're gonna, like, just because it's such a different market, it would end up adding a whole bunch of cruft to the app. But because I think both the salespeople and the technical developers on GitHub Enterprise have been able to say, no, we're not going to add that, or no, we're going to take that idea and make it more focused, it's been able to make that side of the code base not crazy at all. So it's a bunch of stuff, culture and tech side of things.
Can I ask a follow-up
Yeah.
question? So you have two funnels, right? And is one more important, more strategic than the other, or how do you manage that tension between the two?
Not really. It's really a matter of just like, because they both bring in money and they both have varying long-term ideas of money. Like, we've usually tried to persuade people to host on .com just because it's easier and it's going to be less headaches and it's a better product idea for you guys. But I mean, if people still want this idea of hosting on their own, we'll support that too. So it's a matter of, I think that was the fear, that we're going to have this split in the company. And I think almost to my surprise, we've been able to say it's just one product and figuring out ways to make it one product rather than diverging, because diverging is really much harder. Mm-hmm.
You said you guys don't like to talk about future things. Why exactly is that? I didn't guess why, but you say why exactly?
It's a number of things. One is the classic. You guys could probably remind me. It's the computer in the '80s that they. Yes, the Osborne, where they announced the next version and then no one bought the current version, so they had no money to develop the next version. So it's very low-level stuff like that. It's also, if I say we're going to add ponies or something to GitHub, you end up setting expectations. Like, I want ponies, I've had unicorns forever, but now I want ponies. And it sucks for us, because since we are so work on what you want, and it's the phrase we usually say a lot is it's not shipped until it's good type of deal. Sometimes the ponies may not arrive until 6 months from now, or sometimes a year from now. And even we've had stuff that are definitely going to ship next week, and it ends up slipping 8 months, because that's just how the cards played out. So we'd rather just, instead of setting expectations, just don't set any expectations, and surprise and delight. And it ends up being people are super excited. Like the stuff that we've had that have been really big ships, like when we did issues 2-3 years ago, because the old one was so horrible. Like it was weird, because we were using it internally for 6 months, and I was just like, oh, this is so awesome, but I can't tell everyone, and I really want to. But when we finally shipped it, people were just like, this is amazing. Like I'm so happy that you finally fixed this and stuff. So.
Kind of along those lines, how do you, as a company, how do you determine when something's ready to ship? I mean, is it something like, there's certain features where you're just going to push them more quickly than others, sort of like, performance of the feature, or is it, like you said, you're going to hold certain things until they're ready?
Yeah, so I've been asked that question a couple of times now, and I still don't necessarily know how to answer it, because it is kind of weird, because we have these two sides of things where, one, we're a really shipping culture company. Like, we want to ship stuff. That's really important. But on the other hand, we don't want to ship stuff unless it's ready to be shipped. So these are kind of odd ends, and to be honest, I don't know how it works. I don't know how we end up shipping stuff at all. But I think it's both of those things. And there have been a few people we've had at GitHub where I don't think they had as much fire under their feet to ship stuff. I think it's not necessarily a matter of their skills or anything like that. It's just they didn't operate in such a clear and open atmosphere like that, and it becomes a problem. Like you have to have people ready to I want to get this out there as much as possible. I think alongside that, something that we do pretty well is celebrating ships, and I think that's important because once you ship something, you get to write the blog post yourself, so you get some fame and glory or whatever. It's a way of saying that yeah, I did this. And we try and celebrate you shipped this thing to GitHub.com today, and we'll have a team update and say yeah, I did this, and you can post that. And just getting that sort of celebration from the rest of the team is really just kind of contagious. So I think that end of things is just getting people to get really excited about shipping stuff is sort of that side of stuff. Mm-hmm.
Like here at HubSpot, we're working in teams of 3 people, small pods, but they own that kind of API or that project. So we're responsible for the operations as well, the engineers, developers. How do you guys work? How do you deal with operations, reliability, who works on those types of things?
So we have an ops team, which they're ultimately in charge of all of the uptime and scalability and stuff of GitHub.com. It's like I was saying earlier, we operate much the same way where you own that feature, and owning is not just deploying to production. Owning is you've deployed to production. It's also on you to realize the scaling implications of what you've done. So we have a lot of tooling around database queries and stuff. That's a very simple one. If the database is dying under the load and it's probably your fault, it's you have to fix that basically. So there's a side of that, and then also just a side of the ops team. They're good at telling you if this is crumbling under the load, you have to get on this and start working on it, and you can start working together and dealing with all of that.
So you talked a lot about feedback and kind of how you had the breakdown of you have haters and things like that. How do you think that correlates to a non-typical audience? Because a lot of times for us, I think a lot of the feedback we get comes from an audience that isn't quite like the community that I assume that probably has. So how do you think that changes the game?
I think the broad groups are kind of similar. You may have different. It's weird. GitHub is we're both blessed to have developers as our audience and cursed. Just because we have stuff where we'll get diffs of our CSS and say if you fix this will fix this in this browser. And we're that's awesome. And then we have the same people who are yeah, well, I can fix this in an hour. Why can't you just add me to the repo? And we're well, it's not that simple. But I think people still have the same motivations and stuff regardless of the industry they happen to be in. So I think you can still identify the same type of people. There's still grumpy people in sales and marketing stuff, and I think it's just much more a matter of identifying what their state in the marketplace is, and is there feedback some way I need to be worried about or not?
So this is not a trick question. What do you think is sort of the future for version? I mean, we've gone from RCS to CVS to SVS to more distributed model. So one's where is it going next? And or is it ready for the masses, or is it more the time machine kind of a model good enough for the masses supposed to get up down?
That's an interesting question. I think developers get all the cool stuff at least a decade ahead of time. Git is amazing, and if you talk about the high level too, my mom's a lawyer, and I've talked to her partners and stuff, and they're all just that sounds amazing, I want that. And then you just think yeah, and then you tag this blob as a tag, and then here's the SHA-1, and just it does not work. And people have been trying to come up with a more user-friendly way of not even Git in particular, just all version control systems, and it's difficult. I think Time Machine is a really good example of using really powerful underlying technology and making it more accessible to most people. So I think I really think developers do get the cool stuff early, and I think that proves that this is a really good way to work. The real question is how do you make it just digestible by the masses, and that's going to be really difficult.
I really liked it when you said that something isn't shipped until it's good. Do you ever have any difficulty on people agreeing what good is?
Yeah, a lot. And it depends. Usually, It really depends on the context. Sometimes you just, paint the shed and you have to step back and say like, wow, this doesn't really matter at all. Sometimes like there are cases where people get really into in-depth conversations about stuff. And that alone is usually a good sign that it's not right. If there's any discussion on it at all, if it's really passionate discussion, that's probably a good sign that something is wrong, and at least take a step back and say, is there another way to do this, or how do we want to take it from here? But it really depends on the situation, I think.
What's your favorite staff feature?
Man, if I brought up GitHub.com right now, I'd blow your minds. It's got -next at the end of it on the branch name, so that's like all of our features, I guess. But it's awesome. That's all I can say. I don't know.
How deep do your designers need to be in the software? Say who's responsible for the code?
Yeah, we do. I think almost all of our designers. We have a couple illustrators now who aren't really code oriented at all, but all of our designers are all they at least know HTML, CSS, mostly JavaScript too. Which I think that's definitely been a conscious decision of who we've hired, because we want people to be able to. You end up building designs differently when you actually know how they'll end up being created. And it's, like I was saying earlier, we tend to do like 2-person teams, at least for .com, for like designer and backend. So at least on that one, like I've teamed up with some designers before who I know could do the Ruby to do that. But it's nice that they can say, all right, you handle that and you'll probably do it better and stuff like that. But just like we have a lot of designers who have picked up Ruby. Like this is the first time they've used Ruby before. And even though they don't necessarily, throw down a lot of Ruby in the app, it's been super helpful for them to actually understand the background of things. So we've been trying to figure out better ways to sort of do in-house training of each other, just because, even though you won't ship on it, it's still interesting to learn and stuff like that.
How do projects get open sourced? Like how did HubSpot get open sourced, and why, for example, is like the deploy infrastructure not open source?
It really needs a winner, or not a winner, a champion, because people have asked stuff like that before, and it's just like, open source is not just a switch. Because if it is, we would have open sourced a ton of stuff in the past, but you have to open source documentation, figuring out like, what the best way to deal with like people's weird environments and stuff like that. And then the biggest part is just supporting all the bugs and issues and stuff like that, which has bitten us in the past after like, a year or two, somebody becomes less interested in that project and they move on to other things, and then you have a stale open source project, and that makes everyone upset. So for HubSpot, that was sort of designed from the beginning because we liked how that changed our company. Like we were really, we could end up doing, it transformed how we chatted basically. So that perspective was like, yeah, we want to have other people work in that way as well. Same with Boxen. It was like, well, this has changed how we set up computers. Let's open source this and let everyone else set up their computers just as well. But like the deployment stuff and the testing stuff, our testing stuff is open source under Janky, but our deployment stuff is more, that's really difficult because that's tied to GitHub.com stuff. That's weird, finicky app-related stuff that maybe we only ran into, and then Everweight's got weird deployment stuff too. So it just really depends on somebody wants to do the work to do all of that stuff. And usually we end up with people that would rather just ship products rather than like dealing with open source issues that doesn't directly relate to GitHub.com and stuff like that. So.
I have a related closing question.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I could go on. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So talking about, you guys are an open source powered company. You think a lot about culture. You love the Valve document. Would you consider open sourcing your culture code and publishing things that you use internally to run the company, essentially?
Yeah, but it's. I mean, that's the reason why I give a lot of these talks, is just because that's sort of, because a lot of what we do is not necessarily a document or something like that, or an application or anything like that. So
you got to have something though. There's like when you have like 20 new people join, let's say in the next 2 or 3 months. Like osmosis is not that useful, right? I mean, especially when you have remote workers.
We're starting to figure out. We always try to figure out what the best way to deal with all that stuff is. For a long time, we had a really detailed guide about like, you know, this is how this is all run and stuff like that. And then that became out of date, and then we had some different opinion. Like it changed a whole bunch. So we haven't really had a document we can point to and say, you know, this is how we do stuff.
Yep.
And I think that's the credit of Valve is that they figured out, you know, that's what they wanted their document to look like. So.
I have an idea. What if you just like documented the first 30 days of a GitHub employee, like all the things that went through, how they acquire stuff, what kind of questions they have, their email threads, what they looked at, and publish that.
Cool.
That'd be cool. Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for your time. Thanks you guys for joining.